I'm Lindsay, 34 female. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood that always felt like the perfect backdrop for the life I'd carefully built. For the past 8 years, my world revolved around my career as a financial analyst and my husband, Ethan. We were the couple everyone pointed to, successful, happy, and seemingly in perfect sync. But as I learned, the most pristine facades can hide the deepest cracks, and one explosive argument on a remote island was all it took to bring the entire structure crashing down around me. This is the story of how my dream vacation turned into my worst nightmare, leaving me abandoned and penniless thousands of miles from home. It's about how my husband, the man I trusted with my life, revealed himself to be a monster. But more importantly, it's the story of how I picked myself up from the wreckage, used the very skills he always underestimated, and systematically dismantled the life he tried to steal from me. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The brochure for Isla Perdita promised seclusion, pristine white sand beaches, and water so impossibly blue it looked like a screensaver. For months, Ethan had been working himself to the bone getting his new tech startup, Innovate Forward, off the ground. He was stressed, distant, and perpetually attached to his phone. He sold me on this trip as our much-needed reset, a chance to disconnect from the world and reconnect with each other. I craved it more than I let on. The distance between us had grown from a small crack into a chasm, and I was desperate to believe a week in paradise could bridge it. I should have seen the first red flag at the airport. While I was meticulously checking our documents and confirming our luggage weight, Ethan was glued to his phone, furiously typing. "Just putting out one last fire, honey," he said with a practiced smile, not looking up. "The team can't survive without me for 5 minutes." I remember feeling a familiar pang of annoyance mixed with a dose of pride. He was brilliant, a visionary in his field, and I'd always supported his ambition. I was the steady one, the financial analyst who managed our investments and made sure our foundation was rock solid while he chased his dreams. We were a team, or so I thought. The flight was long, but the anticipation kept me buzzing. I read a novel while Ethan worked on his laptop, his brow furrowed in concentration. He only looked up when the flight attendant offered him a drink. When we landed, the humid, salt-tinged air felt like a balm. Ethan, for the first time in weeks, seemed to relax. He put his arm around me as we waited for our bags, his smile finally reaching his eyes. "See, I told you this was what we needed," he murmured, kissing my temple. For a moment, all my anxieties melted away. This was the man I married. This was the escape we deserved. The rental car was a convertible, another one of Ethan's grand gestures. We drove with the top down along winding coastal roads, the wind whipping through my hair, the scent of tropical flowers filling the air. Our villa was even more stunning than the pictures. It was perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, with an infinity pool that seemed to merge with the horizon. A bottle of chilled champagne was waiting for us. "To us," Ethan toasted, clinking his glass against mine. "To reconnecting." The first 2 days were idyllic, a carefully curated performance of a happy marriage. We snorkeled in the crystal-clear water, hiked to a hidden waterfall, and had romantic dinners under the stars. Ethan was attentive, charming, and present in a way he hadn't been for months. He left his phone in the villa, and we talked for hours, laughing about old memories and making plans for the future. I felt myself softening, the walls I'd built around my heart starting to crumble. I allowed myself to believe that everything was going to be okay. The argument started on the 3rd day, over something so trivial it was almost laughable in hindsight. We were planning our afternoon. I wanted to visit a local market I'd read about in the guidebook, a place known for its handmade crafts and authentic food. Ethan wanted to drive to a famous golf course on the other side of the island. "Lindsay, we can go to a farmer's market anywhere," he said dismissively. "This is a world-class course. It's an experience." "But it's your experience, Ethan," I countered, trying to keep my voice even. "You know I don't golf. I thought this trip was about doing things together." His face tightened. It was a subtle shift, but one I knew all too well. It was the look he got right before his charm evaporated and his arrogance took over. Everything doesn't have to be a we activity. I'm just trying to relax. You're turning this into a negotiation. The word neg. Tiashin stung. It was what I did for a living, analyzing numbers and outcomes. He was weaponizing my career against me. I'm not negotiating, I said, my voice rising slightly. I'm trying to have a vacation with my husband, the one who's been so busy for the last 6 months that we barely have a conversation that doesn't involve his company's burn rate. That was it. The floodgates opened. All the resentment and frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface for months came pouring out. He accused me of not being supportive of his dream. I accused him of being emotionally absent and treating me like a line item in his budget. The fight was ugly, escalating with a terrifying speed. Voices were raised. Hurtful things were said, words thrown like stones that could never be taken back. You know what? I need some air, he finally snarled, grabbing the keys to the rental car from the hook by the door. I'm going for a drive, alone. I watched him storm out, the door slamming behind him with a definitive crack that echoed through the silent villa. I stood there, trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. I expected him to peel out of the driveway, maybe drive around for an hour to cool off, and then come back, ready for a tense but necessary apology. That's what we usually did. We'd fight, we'd separate, and then we'd talk it through. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, then two, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple, but the beauty of it was lost on me. I tried calling his phone. It went straight to voicemail. Again and again. Panic began to claw at my throat. This felt different. This wasn't just him cooling off. This was a deliberate, deafening silence. The vibrant colors of the sunset were a cruel mockery of the growing darkness inside me. I paced the cool tile floor of the villa, from the sliding glass doors overlooking the ocean to the front door and back again. With every passing minute, the silence grew heavier, more menacing. The initial anger from our fight had long since evaporated, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that twisted my stomach into a tight, painful knot. My mind raced, creating a dozen scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Had he gotten into an accident on the winding, unfamiliar roads? Did he drive off a cliff? But even as I entertained those thoughts, a deeper, more chilling intuition told me this wasn't an accident. This was a choice. I checked my purse for the 10th time, hoping I'd somehow overlooked my wallet. I hadn't. It was gone. I remembered it clearly now. I'd left it in the glove compartment of the rental car after we stopped for lunch. We were in a hurry, and I'd tucked it away for safekeeping, a small, thoughtless act that now had catastrophic consequences. My credit cards, my debit card, my driver's license, and the emergency cash I always carried, all of it was in that car. With Ethan. A wave of nausea washed over me. I was on a remote island, in a country where I didn't speak the language fluently, with no car, no money, and no identification. The villa was paid for through the end of the week, but that was little comfort. My entire identity, my ability to function in the modern world, was in a small leather rectangle in a car that had vanished. My phone was my only lifeline. I tried calling Ethan again. Voicemail. I sent him a flurry of texts, my messages growing more frantic. Ethan, where are you? I'm getting worried. Please just call me, I'm sorry. Ethan, this isn't funny anymore, you have my wallet. No response. The 3 little dots that indicate someone is typing never appeared. It was like shouting into a void. I sank onto the plush white sofa, the luxurious fabric feeling cold and alien against my skin. The villa, which had felt like a paradise just hours ago, now felt like a gilded cage. I looked around at the opulent decor, the infinity pool, the breathtaking view, all symbols of a life I thought was mine, a life that was now proving to be a fragile illusion. Who was this man I had married? The Ethan I knew could be arrogant and self-absorbed, but he wasn't cruel. He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't abandon me in a foreign country with nothing, would he? Doubt began to creep in, replaying the last few months in my head with a new, horrifying clarity. The late nights at the office. The hushed phone calls he'd take in another room. The way he'd started password protecting his phone and laptop, something he'd never done before. He'd claimed it was for corporate security, a precaution to protect his startup's intellectual property. I, the ever-trusting and supportive wife, had accepted it without question. How could I have been so blind? My training as a financial analyst kicked in, an absurdly detached part of my brain starting to look for patterns, for data points I had missed. The expensive gifts he'd bought me recently, a designer handbag, a diamond necklace. Were they tokens of affection, or were they guilt offerings? The sudden business trips to cities that had no strategic importance for his company, the vague explanations, and a new, almost frantic energy about him. I had attributed it all to the stress of his new venture. I had made excuses for him because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. As night fully descended, the cheerful sounds of the island, the chirping of crickets, the distant rhythm of a steel drum band felt jarring and intrusive. My isolation was complete. I was trapped. I called the rental car company, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. The agent on the other end was sympathetic but unhelpful. The car was rented in my husband's name, Ethan Thompson. Without him present or a police report, they couldn't track the vehicle using its GPS. "I understand your concern, ma'am," the agent said in a calm, practiced tone, "but our policy is clear. We suggest you contact the local authorities." The local authorities. The thought filled me with a fresh wave of panic. I imagined trying to explain my situation in my broken Spanish to a skeptical police officer. My husband left after a fight and took my wallet. It sounded like a trivial domestic dispute, not the terrifying act of abandonment it was. They would tell me to wait, that he would surely come back. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that he wasn't coming back. This wasn't a temporary act of anger. This was a calculated desertion. Exhaustion finally began to set in, a heavy, suffocating blanket. I couldn't stay in the villa. It was his space, a stage he had set for this final, cruel act. I needed to get out. I grabbed the only thing of value I had on me, my phone, and the villa key. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I couldn't wait there for a man who had already left me behind. I stepped out into the warm, humid night. The villa was at the end of a long, private road, surrounded by dense tropical foliage. The main road was at least a mile away. As I started walking, the darkness felt absolute, broken only by the sliver of a moon overhead. Every rustle in the trees sounded like a threat. My designer resort wear felt ridiculous, my sandals flimsy and ill-suited for the gravel path. I was a caricature of a damsel in distress, and I hated it. I hated the tears of fear and frustration streaming down my face. I hated how weak and helpless I felt. Most of all, I hated Ethan for doing this to me, for reducing me to this pathetic state. With each step I took down that dark, lonely road, a new feeling began to smolder beneath the fear and the hurt. Rage. It was a cold, hard ember at first, but with every meter I put between myself and that empty villa, it grew hotter, brighter. He thought he could break me. He thought he could leave me stranded and helpless. He had underestimated me. He had made a grave, analytical error. He had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just his wife. I was Lindsay, a financial analyst who built her career on finding the cracks in a system and exploiting them. And I realized, as I finally reached the dimly lit main road, that my marriage had been a system built on lies. And I was going to bring it all crashing down. The main road was little more than a two-lane strip of asphalt winding along the coast. Cars passed infrequently, their headlights cutting through the darkness before plunging me back into it. My thumb felt useless. Nobody was going to stop for a lone woman walking on the side of the road at night. Just as despair began to set in, a sputtering noise grew louder, and an old, beat-up scooter pulled over a few feet ahead of me. An older woman with a kind, wrinkled face and a cascade of gray hair tied back in a colorful scarf looked at me with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked in heavily accented but clear English. "You look lost." Tears welled up in my eyes, a fresh wave of relief and desperation washing over me. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob. She clucked her tongue sympathetically, patting the seat behind her. "Come on, get on. You are not safe out here alone." I hesitated for only a second before climbing onto the back of the scooter. I wrapped my arms around her sturdy waist as she kicked the engine back to life. "My name is Clara," she shouted over the motor's whine. "I have a small guest house just up the road. We will get you some tea and figure things out." I buried my face in her back, the simple, unexpected kindness of a stranger undoing the last of my composure. I cried silently for the entire 5-minute ride, grieving for the man I thought I knew and the life I thought I had. Clara's guest house was a charming, rustic building covered in flowering vines, set back from the road. It was the antithesis of the cold, modern villa I had just fled. It felt warm, lived in, and safe. She led me into a cozy kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and baked bread and sat me down at a worn wooden table. She placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea in my hands, her movements calm and reassuring. She didn't press me for details, just sat with me in comfortable silence while I drank the tea and my trembling slowly subsided. "Now," she said gently, once my cup was empty, "tell me what happened." And so it all poured out. The perfect vacation, the stupid fight, the slammed door, the missing car, the stolen wallet. I told her everything, the words tumbling over each other in my haste to make sense of the nightmare. I expected skepticism, perhaps even pity. Instead, Clara listened with a deep, unwavering attention, her dark eyes filled with a sad understanding. When I finished, she simply nodded. "I have seen this before," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This island. It is a beautiful place for people in love. But for those with secrets, it has a way of bringing them to the surface. He did not just leave, my dear, he ran." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was right. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage, it was an escape. Ethan had planned this. The fight was just the excuse he needed, the trigger he had been waiting for. "I need to get to the airport," I said, my voice gaining a new sense of urgency. "I have my phone. My passport is still in my luggage at the villa. If I can get my things, I can call my bank, cancel my cards, and book a flight home." Clara shook her head slowly. "The villa is a 15-minute drive from here, too far to walk back tonight, and the airport is on the other side of the island an hour away. Nothing will be open now. You will stay here tonight. In the morning, I will help you." She showed me to a small, simple room with a comfortable bed and clean linens. It was nothing like the luxurious suite I'd shared with Ethan, but it felt like the safest place in the world. For the first time in hours, I could breathe. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind was a chaotic storm of betrayal and logistical problems. How would I pay Clara? How would I get my luggage? How would I get home? Sometime in the middle of the night, an idea sparked in the darkness: my finances. As a financial analyst, I was obsessive about our money. I managed everything: our joint accounts, our investments, our credit cards. Ethan had always found it boring, happy to let me handle the details while he focused on the big picture. He had his own business accounts, of course, but our personal life, our shared assets, that was my domain. I grabbed my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I logged into our joint banking app. My heart pounded as the page loaded. And there it was, the first hard piece of evidence. A charge from earlier that day at a hotel. Not just any hotel, but the Azure Bay Resort, a high-end, exclusive resort on the far side of the island, the side with the golf course. The charge was for a couple's massage and dinner for two. The transaction had posted just an hour before he stormed out of our villa. He hadn't gone for a drive to cool off. He had gone to a dinner reservation with someone else. My breath hitched. It was one thing to suspect, to feel it in your gut. It was another to see it in stark, black and white numbers on a bank statement. The cold, hard data confirmed my deepest fear. A new charge appeared as I stared at the screen, a transaction from just an hour ago. A payment to Island Hopper Airlines. It wasn't a major carrier. It was a small, regional airline that flew private charters and short-haul flights between the islands. He wasn't just on the other side of the island. He was leaving, he was running. My rage returned, cold and sharp this time. The shock and fear were burning away, leaving behind something much stronger: resolve. He had made a critical mistake. He had abandoned me, but he had left me with my phone. He had left me with access to the one thing I controlled completely: our money. He thought he had taken everything, but he had left me the keys to his destruction. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, I worked. I sat cross-legged on that simple bed in a stranger's guest house, and I began to untangle the web of our financial life. I opened my laptop, which thankfully I'd left at the villa and had grabbed with my phone. I connected to Clara's Wi-Fi, and the world of data opened up to me. I wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. I was an analyst with a problem to solve, and Ethan had just become my sole focus. The first thing I did was change the password to our joint bank account, locking him out. It was a small, petty move, but it was a start. Then I began to dig deeper. I pulled up statements from the last 6 months looking for anomalies, for patterns I had missed. And the patterns were there, hiding in plain sight. Weekly charges from a high-end coffee shop near his office, always for two. A subscription to a flower delivery service, but I hadn't received flowers in over a year. Hotel charges in C. IDs where he had no business meetings, disguised as client entertainment on his expense reports. It was a trail of breadcrumbs, a story of his infidelity written in debits and credits. He wasn't just cheating, he was funding a whole separate life with our shared money. The money I managed, invested, and grew. The very foundation he was now trying to rip out from under me. Lying there in the dark, with the quiet hum of the guest house around me, I made a promise to myself. He wasn't going to get away with it. He thought he had left me with nothing. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. The next morning, I felt a strange sense of calm. The emotional storm of the previous night had passed, leaving behind a landscape of grim clarity. I knew what I had to do. When I went down to the kitchen, Clara had a simple breakfast of fruit and toast waiting for me. She took one look at my face and seemed to understand that something had shifted. "You have a plan," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "I do," I replied, my voice steady, "but I need your help. I need to get back to the villa to get my passport and my things, and I need to get to a police station." Clara didn't hesitate. She lent me $100 in local currency for a taxi and gave me the number of a driver she trusted. "You pay me back when you can," she said, waving away my attempts to refuse. "Women must help each other. Go, be strong." The ride back to the villa was surreal. The lush, beautiful scenery that had enchanted me just days ago now seemed sinister, a beautiful mask hiding a rotten core. The driver dropped me at the gate, and I walked up the long driveway, the key feeling heavy in my hand. The villa was just as we'd left it, pristine, silent, and suffocating. My suitcase was still open on the floor, my clothes a colorful, optimistic mess. His side of the room was completely empty. His closet was bare, his toiletries gone from the bathroom. This confirmed Clara's words. He had planned this. He must have packed his things while I was showering or reading by the pool, waiting for the right moment to create a fight and make his escape. The cowardice of it all was breathtaking. I quickly packed my belongings, my movements efficient and mechanical. My passport was exactly where I'd left it, tucked into a side pocket of my suitcase. Holding it in my hand felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Before I left, I took a small, vindictive pleasure in unplugging his expensive electronics and leaving them in a neat pile on the bed. It was petty, but it felt good. My next stop was the local police station. As I'd feared, explaining the situation was difficult. The officer on duty was polite but dismissive, his eyes glazed over with boredom. A domestic dispute, a tourist melodrama. "Your husband left after an argument," he repeated slowly, as if I were a child. "He will probably be back tomorrow, apologetic and with flowers." "He's not coming back," I insisted, trying to keep my voice from shaking with frustration. "He took my wallet, my money, all my identification. He has abandoned me here. I need to file a report." It was the mention of theft that finally got his attention. Stealing a wallet was a concrete crime, something he could write down on a form. I filled out the paperwork, listing everything that was missing. The report was my golden ticket. It was official documentation of his crime, something I could use with the banks, the credit card companies, and the embassy. With the police report in hand, I went to a small internet cafe Clara had told me about. For the next 8 hours, fueled by strong, bitter coffee, I went to war. I was no longer a wife. I was a forensic accountant, and my own life was the subject of the audit. I started with the credit cards. Our main joint card had a secondary card for Ethan. I called the company, reported his card as stolen using the police report as proof, and had it canceled immediately. Then I asked them to flag all recent suspicious charges. The customer service representative was incredibly helpful, tracing the transactions from the past 48 hours. There it was again, the charge for Island Hopper Airlines. But this time, I got a destination. He had flown to a neighboring, much larger island, one known for its international airport and lax banking laws. He was trying to disappear. Next, I logged into our investment portfolio. This was my territory, the financial world where I was fluent. We had a substantial joint brokerage account, a mix of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds that I had carefully cultivated over the years. It was our nest egg, our future. Ethan had always been a passive partner in this, happy to see the numbers go up but uninterested in the mechanics. His name was on the account, which meant he had the legal right to access it. A cold dread washed over me as I realized the magnitude of the threat. If he could drain our bank account, he could just as easily liquidate our entire portfolio and vanish with the proceeds. I had to move faster. I initiated a transfer of all the liquid assets, the cash, the money market funds, into a new bank account that I opened online in my name only. It was a gray area legally, but I was operating on the principle of possession is 9/10 of the law. I was protecting our assets from a thief who happened to be my husband. The stocks and bonds were trickier. Selling them would take a few days to settle, and it would trigger a massive capital gains tax event. I couldn't just sell everything without raising red flags. I needed a more nuanced approach. I put in stop-loss orders on all our major holdings, but at prices far below the current market value. It was an insurance policy. If he tried to log in and dump the stocks quickly, the orders would trigger sales at a low price, but it was better than him getting everything. It was a defensive move designed to minimize damage. The most damning discovery came when I started digging into the financials for his startup, Innovate Forward. I was a minority shareholder, a token gesture he'd made when he founded the company. It granted me access to their investor portal. His pitch to investors had been built on a proprietary algorithm he claimed to have developed. But as I combed through the technical documents, I noticed something familiar about the code structure. On a hunch, I cross-referenced it with a project from his previous employer, a major tech firm he'd left 2 years ago. And there it was. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. He hadn't developed a new algorithm. He had stolen it. He had built his entire company, his dream, on a foundation of intellectual property theft. This changed everything. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about fraud, massive company-destroying fraud. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had betrayed his investors, his employees, and his former company. I downloaded every file, every document, every line of code I could find, creating a secure, encrypted file and backing it up to a cloud server he couldn't possibly know about. The digital trail he and his lover left was sloppy. Her name was Isabella, a 26-year-old graphic designer at his company. Her social media was a goldmine. Her accounts were private, but her friends' accounts weren't. I found photos of them together at team-building events where they were the only two present. A picture of her wearing a distinctive necklace, the same one I'd seen on our credit card statement, purchased from an online jeweler 3 months ago. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when I found her blog. It was filled with romantic posts about her brilliant older boyfriend who was going to leave his cold, unsupportive wife and start a new life with her in paradise. The latest post from 2 days ago was titled Our Adventure Begins. It detailed their plan to fly to the larger island, transfer their funds to an offshore account, and then disappear to South America. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to liquidate every asset we had and build a new life with her on the ruins of mine. I had the evidence, I had the motive. Now I needed a plan. My initial instinct was pure emotion. Expose him, ruin him, burn everything to the ground. But my analytical mind took over, urging caution and strategy. A chaotic, emotional explosion would be satisfying for a moment, but a deliberate, calculated demolition would be far more effective and ultimately more devastating for him. He had abandoned me on an island, thinking I was helpless. I would use that isolation to my advantage. He wouldn't see me coming. He thought he had a head start, but he was operating on a timeline of days. I was now operating on a timeline of hours. My first move was tactical and defensive. I needed to protect what was left and create a financial firewall. I spent another hour on the phone with our investment firm. I didn't try to move the stocks. Instead, I reported a security breach on the account, using the police report as evidence of my stolen identity. I claimed I had reason to believe my husband's login credentials had also been compromised. This triggered an immediate security freeze on the account. Nothing could be sold, transferred, or withdrawn without a complex verification process that involved me, in person, with a government-issued ID. I had effectively trapped our shared fortune in a vault that only I could unlock. He could log in and look at the money, but he couldn't touch a single cent. The thought of him discovering this, furious and powerless, brought the first genuine smile to my face in days. Next, I focused on our property. We owned a beautiful home, the one I was currently paying the mortgage on from our joint account. I couldn't sell it from under him, but I could encumber it. I logged into the county clerk's office website. It was a clunky, outdated system, but it was functional. As a minority shareholder in his fraudulent company, I had standing. I drew up a preliminary lien against our shared property, citing potential corporate malfeasance and the commingling of personal assets with a business under investigation for fraud. It was a legally dubious move, and it probably wouldn't hold up in court long-term, but it didn't need to. It just needed to be filed. The lien would act as a giant red flag to any potential buyer or lender, effectively making the house impossible to sell or borrow against until the lien was cleared. I had turned our biggest asset into an anchor that would drag him down. Now for the main event, his company, his dream, the monument he had built to his own ego on a foundation of stolen code. This required a multi-pronged attack. First, I composed a detailed, anonymous email. The recipient was the general counsel of his former employer, the tech giant from which he had stolen the algorithm. The email was a masterclass in professional subtlety. I didn't make wild accusations. I simply presented the evidence side by side, their proprietary code from a 2022 internal project, and the revolutionary code at the core of Innovate Forward. I attached the files I had downloaded, highlighting the identical sections. I ended the email with a simple, chilling question. Does this look familiar to you? I knew a corporation of that size would have a team of ruthless lawyers who would descend on Ethan's little startup with the force of a tidal wave. The intellectual property lawsuit would be swift and merciless, and it would bankrupt him. But that would take time. I wanted something more immediate. My second email was to the lead investor of Innovate Forward's seed round, a venture capitalist named Marcus Thorne with a reputation for being brilliant but utterly unforgiving. I had met him once at a company dinner. He had been dismissive of me, barely making eye contact. Now, he was about to become my unwitting instrument of revenge. This email was different. I wasn't anonymous. I introduced myself as Lindsay Thompson, Ethan's wife, and a concerned shareholder. I explained that I had recently uncovered evidence of significant financial and ethical irregularities within the company. I attached a carefully curated selection of documents, the proof of the stolen code, and bank statements showing Ethan using corporate funds to pay for lavish personal expenses with Isabella, disguised as business costs. I knew this would hit a nerve. VCs hate being made to look like fools. Funding a fraud is the ultimate sin in their world. I concluded the email by stating my intention to cooperate fully with any and all legal and financial audits. I hit send on both emails, one after the other. It felt like launching 2 torpedoes into the hull of a ship. The impact wouldn't be immediate, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that the vessel was already sinking. My final act of financial warfare was the most personal. Ethan had always been obsessed with his credit score. He saw it as a measure of his success, a numerical representation of his worth. We had excellent credit, something I had worked hard to maintain. I logged into our credit card accounts one last time. We had several cards with high limits, all of them currently frozen, but the balances were still there. I couldn't spend money, but I could make payments. I took the remaining funds I had secured in my new private bank account and paid off the entire balance on my personal credit cards. Then, I systematically stopped the automatic payments for all of our joint accounts and for his personal business cards that were linked to our joint account. The mortgage payment, the car lease payment for his luxury SUV back home, the payments for the high-end servers his company relied on. Within 30 days, the late payment notices would start rolling in. Within 60, his pristine credit score would begin to plummet. Within 90, it would be in ruins. It was a slow, creeping form of financial poison. He wouldn't even know it was happening until it was far too late. As I logged out of the last account, I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also of empowerment. In the space of a single day, I had gone from victim to architect. He had taken my wallet, my sense of security. In return, I had frozen his assets, encumbered his property, torpedoed his company, and shattered his financial reputation. He had left me stranded on an island, but I had just set his entire world on fire from thousands of miles away. I paid for my time at the internet cafe and walked back to Clara's guest house. The sun was setting again, but this time, it didn't feel menacing. It felt like a promise. A new day was coming, and I was ready for it. The flight home was the longest of my life. After explaining the situation to the U.S. Embassy on the main island, a process made infinitely easier by the police report and Clara's witness statement, they issued me an immersion. Psy passport. Clara had graciously paid for my ticket on a commercial flight, a debt I swore I would repay tenfold. During the flight, I didn't watch movies or read. I stared out the window at the clouds, my mind replaying the steps I had taken, checking and rechecking my strategy like a general before a battle. The torpedoes I had launched were silent, traveling through the deep waters of corporate and legal systems. I had no idea if they had hit their targets yet, but the waiting was excruciating. I landed back in the US to a barrage of notifications. My phone, once silent, was now exploding with life. Voicemails from a frantic Ethan, dozens of angry, confused texts, emails from our bank's fraud department. The first torpedo had hit. He had tried to access the investment account and found it frozen. He had tried to use his credit cards and found them declined. He had tried to transfer money and found the accounts empty. The initial texts were arrogant. "Lindsay, what did you do? Did you mess with the accounts? This isn't funny. Call me now." Then, as the hours passed and he realized the full extent of his financial lockout, the tone shifted to panic. "Where's our money? I can't access anything. The bank says there's a security freeze. This is a nightmare. Are you trying to ruin me?" The last message, sent just an hour before I landed, was almost pleading. "Lindsay, please, I know you're upset. We need to talk. I can explain everything. I'm flying home." So he was coming back, not out of remorse, but because he had no other choice. His escape plan had failed because his access to my financial acumen had been severed. He and Isabella were likely stranded on their own island now, their romantic getaway turning into a prison of their own making, with dwindling cash and no way out. The irony was exquisite. I went straight from the airport to our house. The key worked. The silence inside was heavy, filled with the ghosts of a life that no longer existed. It was strange to be back. Everything was exactly as I had left it, yet nothing was the same. I felt like a stranger in my own home. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, a taxi pulled into the driveway. I watched from the living room window as Ethan got out. He looked terrible. He was unshaven, his expensive clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked defeated. Isabella was not with him. He fumbled with his keys at the front door, and I heard him swear when they didn't work. I had changed the locks the day before. He resorted to ringing the doorbell, the chime echoing through the silent house. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. He stared at me, a mixture of anger, relief, and confusion on his face. "Lindsay, thank God, what the hell is going on? Why did you change the locks? I've been locked out of everything. Our money is gone." "Our money isn't gone, Ethan," I said, my voice as cold and steady as a frozen lake. "It's safe from you." I stepped aside, letting him into the foyer. "Where is Isabella?" His eyes widened in shock. It was clear he thought I didn't know. "What? Who? I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I said, walking past him into the living room. On the coffee table, I had arranged a neat little display. Printed copies of the hotel receipt from Azure Bay Resort. The bill for the couple's massage. the flight confirmation for two on Island Hopper Airlines, and blown-up photos from Isabella's friends' social media, showing the two of them looking cozy at a beach bar. He stared at the evidence, his face draining of color. The arrogant bluster vanished, replaced by the pathetic look of a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Lindsay, it's not what you think," he stammered. "Save it," I cut him off. "I know everything. I know about the affair, the stolen money you spent on her, the plan to drain our accounts and run off to South America. It was a good plan, I'll give you that, but you made one critical miscalculation." He looked at me, bewildered. "What?" "You forgot who you were married to," I said. "You thought I was just the quiet, supportive wife who handled the boring paperwork. You forgot that I'm a financial analyst. You abandoned me with nothing but my phone, and with that phone, I took back everything you tried to steal." Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and a new wave of horror washed over his face. "What is this?" he whispered, reading the screen. "An email from Marcus Thorne. He's calling an emergency board meeting. He's talking about a forensic audit, financial misconduct. That would be my doing," I said calmly. "I sent him a little care package, proof of you using company funds to finance your affair." I imagine he wasn't thrilled. His phone buzzed again. This time, his face went completely white. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with genuine terror. "That was my lawyer," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He just received a cease and desist letter from my old company. They're suing me for intellectual property theft." "That was me too," I said, allowing myself a small, tight smile. "I figured they'd be interested to know that the golden goose you built your company on was actually their stolen property." He sank onto the sofa, the fight completely gone from him. He looked like a hollowed-out shell of the confident, charismatic man I had once known. He had lost his girlfriend, his money, his company, and his reputation, all in the span of 48 hours. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. I loved you." "No, you didn't," I replied, the last vestiges of my own pain giving way to a cold, hard certainty. "You loved the stability I provided. You loved that I managed our life so you could chase your fantasies. You didn't love me, Ethan. You leveraged me. And when you thought you didn't need me anymore, you discarded me. You left me for dead. But you should know better than anyone, I'm good at managing assets. And you, Ethan, have just been liquidated." I walked to the front door and held it open. "There's a bag packed for you in the garage with some of your things. The rest of your belongings will be sent to your parents' address. My lawyer will be in touch with yours regarding the divorce proceedings. Goodbye, Ethan." He stumbled out the door in a daze, a man who had just watched his entire world burn down around him, unable to comprehend that the person who lit the match was the same one he had so carelessly tried to extinguish. Closing the door on Ethan felt like closing the final chapter of a long, complicated book. The silence that followed wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was light and clean, like the air after a thunderstorm. For the first time in years, my home felt truly my own. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal and financial activity, but it was a controlled chaos, one that I was directing. The lawsuit from Ethan's former employer was brutal and efficient. Faced with irrefutable proof of his theft, Innovate Forward crumbled almost overnight. The investors, led by a furious Marcus Thorne, invoked a clause in their agreement to claw back their funding and oust Ethan from the company he had built on lies. He was left with nothing but debt and the looming threat of further legal action. The divorce was surprisingly swift. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, was armed with the mountain of evidence I had compiled. The proof of infidelity, financial fraud, and abandonment was so overwhelming that Ethan's legal team had no choice but to advise him to settle, and settle quickly. He tried to fight for half of our assets, but the lien I had placed on the house and the security freeze on the investment account had given me all the leverage. I agreed to give him a small portion of the liquid funds, enough for him to hire a decent lawyer and find a cheap apartment, but not enough to ever regain the lifestyle he'd taken for granted. It wasn't about generosity. It was a strategic move to get him out of my life as quickly and cleanly as possible. I wanted a clean break, a fresh start. I sold the house. It held too many memories, and I found I no longer needed the validation of a big, empty space. I bought a smaller, chic condo in the city, closer to my work and filled with light. Decorating it became my therapy. I chose every piece of furniture, every piece of art, every color on the walls. It was a space that reflected me, and only me. There were difficult days, of course. Moments of sadness would ambush me at unexpected times. Hearing a song we used to love, seeing a couple holding hands in the park. Betrayal leaves scars, and they don't fade overnight. But the sadness was always followed by a profound sense of relief, of gratitude for my escape. I had seen the real Ethan, the man behind the charming mask, and I had survived him. One of the first things I did after the divorce was finalized was wire a substantial amount of money to Clara. It was far more than the cost of the plane ticket and the room for the night. I included a note with it. "You told me women must help each other. You did more than help me, you saved me. Thank you for being the light in my darkest hour." She sent me an email back a week later, filled with warmth and wisdom. We became unlikely pen pals, our emails bridging the thousands of miles between us. Her friendship was one of the most beautiful and unexpected gifts to come out of the wreckage. My work became my sanctuary. I poured my energy into my career, and my focus and dedication paid off. I was promoted to senior vice president, a position I had been working towards for years. My colleagues remarked on my newfound confidence, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. They were right. The woman who had been terrified and alone on a dark road in a foreign country was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, who had faced the worst. ND had not only survived but thrived. I never heard from Isabella again. I assume she quickly distanced herself from Ethan once his financial empire collapsed. Their great adventure had been built on the promise of my money, and without it, their connection proved to be as hollow as Ethan himself. About a year after the divorce, I took a solo vacation. Not to a tropical island, but to the rugged, beautiful coastline of Northern California. I spent a week hiking through ancient redwood forests, driving along winding cliffside roads, and watching the powerful waves of the Pacific crash against the shore. On my last evening, I sat on a rocky outcrop, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. It was the same sun that had set on my despair on Isla Perdita. But this time, I wasn't stranded. I wasn't afraid. I was free. Ethan thought that by taking my wallet and my car, he was taking my power. But he was wrong. My power wasn't in my credit cards or my cash. It was in my mind, my resilience, my ability to see the patterns in the chaos and forge a new path. He tried to leave me with nothing, but in the end, he was the one who lost everything.